So I thought we'd have a bit of fun today, a bit of cheap watch fun. In here should be 2 AliExpress chronograph watches, both of which cost pretty much nothing to buy new, both of which ship with a black dial, and I figured, you know what, why don't we put them together quickly and see which one is potentially better. Now, thanks to AliExpress for basically allowing me to buy these at a discounted rate. I'll leave a link to the exact stores I purchased these from in the video description, by the way, if you want to check them out. And I'm really quite interested in this one, and that's because this one we've kind of already tried in a way. So let's take a look at this first. So in here we should have an AD2037, which is an Addy's Dive chronograph. Now, I actually covered this watch a couple of weeks back, but in a slightly different form. So the last one I looked at was this good-looking little thing here, which was suggested to me by Greg, one of my viewers, and everyone seemed to be very impressed by this watch. Now, it's not a one-to-one clone of anything, but it is really similar to an old Patek watch, just with some slight differences and a different color. Both of these are similar again to luxury watches, and what's in here is apparently another color version of this. Now, this one was already sitting in the basket when AliExpress said I could have it for slightly cheaper, and this is supposedly a black version. Oh, sliding its way out to me. Now, the previous one is ridiculous value for money. It's currently retailing for just over £40 on AliExpress, and it's the same with the black one. Although the black one seemed to have sold out almost instantly and was much harder to find at the moment. I imagine that it'll come back into stock at some point. But this one really fits into the bargain category. I mean, look at this thing. It really is this cool, vintage-looking mecha quartz chronograph there. Really looks great for the money. Surprisingly high quality. Now, the only thing with these, which I really should have mentioned in the first video on this watch, is that because it uses a VK63, I think it is? No, sorry, VK64, and it's a pretty good little movement that means that when you set the chronograph off there, it has like a semi-sweep to it. The pushers also have a nicer feeling than most standard quartz chronographs. And then when you stop it, it snaps immediately back to 12, just like a mechanical chronograph. The only caveat with this particular unit is that when that's not activated, the watch kind of looks dead in a way. There's nothing ticking or moving. There's no regular seconds hand, which is a little bit of a frustration. I mean, aside from that, it is a very attractive watch, but it's certainly something to bear in mind. Now, out of the two, the one on the left is obviously the one that makes much more of a statement here. This black one is by far the safer choice, I would say. Strap as well is kind of mediocre. Now, for a watch at this price, you're never going to get a fantastic strap. It's just one of the areas they have to cut. And this watch could definitely do with more of a tapered strap. At least it is quick release, so you can flick it off really quickly and easily. And also, a key thing with this Addy's Dive is the hideous logo is resigned to the case back. And it's a very clean design up front. But you may well have seen this watch before. Probably won't have seen this one. Now, what's on here is not an Addy's Dive. This is a Pagani design watch. Now, this brand is notorious for copy and pasting luxury watch designs, but this one appears to not be a 100% rip-off. Now, at first, I thought this one was totally original. I thought for the first time maybe Pagani had decided to do some of their own design work, which is ironic, considering that design is literally in their brand name. But yeah, since ordering, I've discovered that this is actually mostly a clone of a lesser-known Tissot chronograph. This one is very similar. It's not identical, but it's certainly more similar than I was hoping. Now, one thing I've noticed is that Pagani has changed their packaging a tad. You can see it kind of has a textured faux grain on the outside, but what really matters is the watch. Now this, I would say, is certainly one of the better looking Pagani watches they've made. Now I'll pop that Tissot watch on screen now, and you can see this one is very similar in several ways. Same overall shape, even similar color scheme, but there's also a couple of differences there. And I think it's also partially pulling from the Bullover Moon watch. Is it the Lunar Pilot? Is that what you call it? And if you look at the pushers there, that really gives you an indication of that. Now, something to note with this one is it's got much more of a standard domed crystal. So unlike the Addy's Dive, which has a boxed crystal, which curves at the edges and then is quite flat on the top, this one is just much more of a standard curve. And as a result, it does tend to pick up quite a few more reflections. And legibility isn't nearly as good with the Pagani, as you can see. Despite the two of them having near identical color scheme, they've also got completely different cases. I mean, The one on the left is certainly dressier and more vintage inspired, got delicate lugs, whereas this is much more bulbous, although it's not as huge as I was expecting. I recently unboxed a Red Star watch, and I don't know if that one's published yet or not, but that had like a bullhead chronograph design, and that was really thick. It was mechanical, which explains some of it, but for some reason I was expecting this to be the same, but it's actually not nearly as thick as I thought. And while the bracelet doesn't really match the case, as you can see here, the brushing is in a different orientation, almost looks like a slightly different tone of metal as well, and the sides are quite simplistic, but the bezel is definitely the best polishing I've seen on a Pagani design watch, and also overall it's quite good looking. Certainly has some of that racing chronograph thing going on. What's the model name of this one now? So this new model they're calling the Pagani Design, or PD1782. And while it may have much more glare on the crystal, it is sapphire crystal, which would at least partly explain that, whereas the crystal on this watch is mineral instead. It is a stainless steel case still, and it also seems to have a solid link bracelet. Let's get some of the plastic off this. Give you a close-up look of each of these first. Here is the Addies dive first of all. Now this one, as you can see, has a lot of blue anti-reflective treatment on the crystal. So while the dial is black, you kind of end up with a bit more of a slightly navy look here. And I'd say the case finishing is probably better on this one, even though out of the two, this tends to be the one that retails for slightly less. Also, as far as I could tell, no bracelets option with this one. Still looks fantastic for the money, just like the previous one. Now this Pagani watch, goodness, it definitely looks a lot more washed out on camera. It's not the best with the light. It still has those ringed subdials which look pretty good. Markers all seem to be inked instead on this one though, and that doesn't look quite as nice, I don't think, but it might give this some luminescence, whereas the Addies Dive has none. As for the bracelet, this is all solid links, and then at the end you just have a butterfly clasp. One thing that this watch does have that's quite appreciated is it has a couple of these tiny links, so you do get a bit of wiggle room for adjustments. You don't have to worry about removing an entire large link, which is good. I'm glad to see that that's becoming much more commonplace these days. And this one also has a screw back. And what are they claiming here? 100 meters, which is the same as the Addies Dive. Both have got that screwed rear. Does it have a screw down crown, or is this just... Oh, it does have a screw-down crown. Okay. And on the listing, in certain parts, it says quartz chronograph, which suggests it's like just a standard quartz. But then at one point, it says VK63, which is actually a mecha quartz, if I'm not mistaken. So this should perform very similarly to the VK64 in the other watch. If I press this, yeah, you get like a stuttering or a semi-sweeping second hand there. And then when I stop it and reset it, it should snap back straight away. Boom. And pretty good feeling pushers on this one as well. Very, very similar. Now, in terms of sizing, these look pretty different despite having very similar dial width. As a quick reminder with this Addies Dive, about 38mm across, 46 lug to lug, and then with the domed crystal, about 12.4-ish, although it's quite thin without 10mm. The Pagani, meanwhile, we haven't measured before. That's 40.5 wide. Bezel width, just as a curiosity here, is smaller, 38.8. Lug to lug also might be shorter than the other watch. Now, it looks it on the surface, but it actually isn't. It's 47.5. And thickness, thinner with the crystal included, 12.7. But without it, it's actually a bit thicker, about 11mm. Now, just like the other AD2037, fits my 6¼ inch wrist pretty well and is going to look good on, I'd say, small to average wrists. Anything around 7 inches or below, this is going to fit pretty nicely. The only side effect is the strap. I mean, the strap is really long for a watch of this size. I might have a small wrist, but I'm on the smallest hole and it's miles off fitting. So if you've got a smaller wrist, you've really got to bear that in mind with this one. Not the end of the world considering the dirt cheap cost of the watch. You probably have some money left over. But even so, not the best straight out of the box, and you don't get any option for bracelets with this one. It's 20mm lugs, by the way. The Pagani Design, on the other hand, let's see how that looks. Now on the product listing, they actually used the word turtle at one point, and the wear experience of this is very akin to like a Seiko Turtle or even a Seiko Mini Turtle. Has that short but squat profile and not that bad. 40.5mm. Does it wear like that? I'd say it probably does. Despite having this more rotund profile, which usually boosts on wrist presence. I'd say it doesn't seem to affect this one too much. It is slightly on the thicker side, as you can see there, but it's not huge either. Now, I haven't sized the bracelet yet, although it looks like there's plenty to remove there. This should easily fit even my arm, which is ironic. The bigger watch fits better, potentially. Here's a closer look at the pair of them on wrist. It's one of those watches that may be a candidate for a crystal change or could do with one. I can certainly see why certain brands, like Wear watches, for example, they have this kind of similar styled barrel-shaped chronograph, the R1, and they decided to spend considerably more on the crystal. Now, that watch is obviously far more expensive, but they told me they had to really shell out a lot extra to avoid this problem with their watch, so they went for like a bubble effect crystal instead, which significantly helps with reflections. And in fact, why don't we test that versus that Wear watch I mentioned earlier, which we know uses a sapphire crystal. Let's see if Pagani were telling the truth. So we should get a nice strong reading here, and we do. Looking for something similar with this Pagani design. And yes, just the same, it is a sapphire crystal. The Addies dive, meanwhile, should give us virtually nothing. And indeed, yeah, gives us nothing. And at the time of recording, the Pagani is actually only a tiny bit more expensive than the Addies dive, about £5 more expensive. So what's that, about $7 US? So there really isn't much in it. There's the Addies dive. Let me know what you think. If you had to go for one, which would you go for? I mean, for me, it would almost certainly be this one. I feel like this is, well, I would say super versatile. I feel like this other one's probably quite versatile too, just really not a fan of that crystal. Now, one area that we can test where this one will undoubtedly lose is the luminescence, so let's give that a try, eh? Now, I have to say, luminescence was never really a strong point for Pagani design, and this may be the only token win it ever gets. Let's see if it actually lasts any better than previous ones. And the answer is no. It's died. It's at least down 50% just in a few seconds. So while it's technically better than nothing, it isn't really that much better than nothing. So there we are. These two cheap chronos are linked below. Let me know which you prefer, or if they're both trash.